I said, among with others, we'd follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell if need be. That's exactly what we did, and we got him. It took us close to 10 years to put President Obama's commitment into form, and that's exactly what happened. Osama bin Laden was gone. That was 10 years ago. Think about that. We delivered justice to bin Laden a decade ago, and we've stayed in Afghanistan for a decade since. Since then, our reasons for remaining in Afghanistan have become increasingly unclear, even as the terrorist threat that we went to fight evolved. Over the past 20 years, the threat has become more dispersed, metastasizing around the globe. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. With the terror threat now in many places, keeping thousands of troops grounded and concentrated in just one country at a cost of billions each year makes little sense to me and to our leaders. We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create ideal conditions for the withdrawal and expecting a different result. I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth. After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world, I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home. When I came to office, I inherited a diplomatic agreement duly negotiated between the government of the United States and the Taliban that all U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just 3 months after my inauguration. That's what we inherited, that commitment. It's perhaps not what I would have negotiated myself, but it was an agreement made by the United States government, and that means something. So in keeping with that agreement and with our national interest, the United States will begin our final withdrawal, begin it on May 1 of this year. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. And we will do it in full coordination with our allies and partners, who now have more forces in Afghanistan than we do. And the Taliban should know that if they attack us as we draw down, we will defend ourselves and our partners with all the tools at our disposal. Our allies and partners have stood beside us, shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. And we're deeply grateful for the contributions they have made to our shared mission and for the sacrifices they've borne. The plan has long been in together, out together. U.S. troops, as well as forces deployed by our NATO allies and operational partners, will be out of Afghanistan before we mark the 20th anniversary of that heinous attack on September 11th. But we'll not take our eye off the terrorist threat. We'll reorganize our counterterrorism capabilities and the substantial assets in the region to prevent reemergence of terrorists and the threat to our homeland from over the horizon. We'll hold the Taliban accountable for its commitment not to allow any terrorist to threaten the United States or its allies from Afghan soil. The Afghan government has made that commitment to us as well, and will focus our full attention on the threat we face today. In my direction, my team is refining our national strategy to monitor and disrupt significant terrorist threats, not only in Afghanistan, but anywhere they may arise, and they're in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere. I spoke yesterday with President Bush to inform him of my decision, While he and I have had many disagreements over policy throughout the years, we're absolutely united in our respect and support for the valor, courage, and integrity of the women and men of the United States Armed Forces who served. I'm immensely grateful for the bravery and backbone that they have shown through nearly 2 decades of combat deployments. We as a nation are forever indebted to them and to their families. You all know that less than 1% of Americans serve in armed forces. The remaining 99% of them, we owe them. We owe them. They've never backed down from a single mission that we've asked of them. I've witnessed their bravery firsthand during my visits to Afghanistan. They've never wavered in their resolve. They've paid a tremendous price on our behalf. And they have the thanks of a grateful nation. While we'll not stay involved in Afghanistan militarily, our diplomatic and humanitarian work will continue. We'll continue to support the government of Afghanistan. We will keep providing assistance to the Afghan National Defenses and Security Forces. And along with our partners, we have trained and equipped a standing force of over 300,000 Afghan personnel today and hundreds of thousands over the past 2 decades. And they'll continue to fight valiantly on behalf of the Afghans at great cost. They'll support peace talks, as we will support peace talks between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban facilitated by the United Nations. And will continue to support the rights of Afghan women and girls by maintaining significant humanitarian and development assistance. And we'll ask other countries in the region to do more to support Afghanistan, especially Pakistan, as well as Russia, China, India, and Turkey. They all have a significant stake in the stable future for Afghanistan. And over the next few months, we'll also determine what a continued U.S. diplomatic presence in Afghanistan will look like, including how we'll ensure the security of our diplomats. Now look, I know there are many who will loudly insist that diplomacy cannot succeed without a robust U.S. military presence to stand as leverage. We gave that argument a decade. It's never proved effective. Not when we had 98,000 troops in Afghanistan, and not when we were down to a few thousand. Our diplomacy does not hinge on having boots in harm's way, U.S. boots on the ground. We have to change that thinking. American troops shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip between warring parties in other countries. You know, that's nothing more than a recipe for keeping American troops in Afghanistan indefinitely. I also know there are many who will argue that we should stay fighting in Afghanistan because withdrawal would damage America's credibility and weaken America's influence in the world. I believe the exact opposite is true. We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago. That cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021. Rather than return to war with the Taliban, we have to focus on the challenges that are in front of us. We have to track and disrupt terrorist networks and operations that spread far beyond Afghanistan since 9/11. We have to shore up American competitiveness to meet the stiff competition we're facing from an increasingly assertive China. We have to strengthen our alliances and work with like-minded partners to ensure that the rules of international norms that govern cyber threats and emerging technologies that will shape our future are grounded in our democratic values, not those of the autocrats. We have to defeat this pandemic and strengthen the global health system to prepare for the next one, because there will be another pandemic. You know, we'll be much more formidable to our adversaries and competitors over the long term if we fight the battles for the next 20 years, not the last 20. And finally, the main argument for staying longer is what each of my 3 predecessors have grappled with. No one wants to say that we should be in Afghanistan forever, but they insist now is not the right moment to leave. In 2014, NATO issued a declaration affirming that Afghan security forces would from that point on have full responsibility for this country's security by the end of that year. That was 7 years ago. So when will it be the right moment to leave? 1 more year? 2 more years? 10 more years? 10, 20, $30 billion more than the trillion we've already spent? Not now. That's how we got here. And in this moment, there's a significant downside risk to staying beyond May 1st without a clear timetable for departure. If we instead pursue the approach where U.S. exit is tied to conditions on the ground, we have to have clear answers to the following questions. Just what conditions be required to allow us to depart? By what means and how long would it take to achieve them, if they could be achieved at all? And at what additional cost in lives and treasure? I've not heard any good answers to these questions. And if you can't answer them, in my view, we should not stay. The fact is that later today, I'm going to visit Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60. In that sacred memorial to American sacrifice, Section 60 is where our recent war dead are buried, including many of the women and men who died fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's no comforting distance in history in Section 60. The grief is raw. It's a visceral reminder of the living cost of war. For the past 12 years, ever since I became vice president, I've carried with me a card that reminds me of the exact number of American troops killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. That exact number, not an approximation or rounded off number, because every one of those dead are sacred human beings who left behind entire families. An exact accounting of every single solitary one needs to be had. As of the day, today, there are 2,488 U.S. troops and personnel who have died in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom's Sentinel, our Afghanistan conflicts. 20,722 have been wounded. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a child serving in a war zone. And throughout this process, my North Star has been remembering what it was like when my late son Bo was deployed to Iraq. How proud he was to serve his country. How insistent he was to deploy with his unit. And the impact it had on him and all of us at home. We already have service members doing their duty in Afghanistan today whose parents served in the same war. We have service members who are not yet born when our nation was attacked on 9/11. War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked. We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives. Bin Laden is dead and Al-Qaeda is degraded in Iraq. In Afghanistan. And it's time to end the forever war. Thank you all for listening. May God protect our troops. May God bless all those families who lost someone in this endeavor.
All right, President Biden there, you can see walking away here, April 14th, 2021, the same spot where George Bush back in October of 2001, told the American people that we had begun U.S. strikes on al-Qaeda bases in Afghanistan. Joe Biden saying that this wasn't meant to be a multi-generational undertaking and he will finally pull all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan beginning May 1st and culminating before or by September 11th of this year, the 20th anniversary, of course, of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Here with more is Nick Wadhams, Bloomberg State Department reporter. Nick, listening to the president here, he ended on a note that the Taliban had effectively been crippled in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's been a lot of reporting here at Bloomberg, including, that says the Taliban is still a threat.
Well, that's right. I mean, what you've seen over years is that the Taliban has only made steady gains, taking over more and more of Afghanistan in the years since September 11th. But what you're really hearing from Joe Biden is a sense that regardless of the fact that the Taliban may control more of Afghanistan than it has at any point since September 11th, the U.S. believes essentially that the threat to the United States is elsewhere, and that's what he said, that the threat has dispersed, whether it's ISIS or Al-Shabaab in Somalia or in Syria or in West Africa. The U.S. believes that it essentially has other priorities now, and it essentially thinks that it has the capabilities, whether through drone strikes or intelligence collection or retaining a small force in Afghanistan, despite saying he's withdrawing everybody, that they can essentially control that threat and hold the Taliban and the Afghan government to their promise that they won't allow terror groups to blossom once again in Afghanistan.
Nick, what is the sense that a September deadline is indeed realistic?
According to the administration, they're going to start pulling out troops. Biden said this in the speech. They're going to start the withdrawal May 1st. And given the numbers, this is a tenth of the number of U.S. forces who were surrounding the U.S. Capitol after the January 6th attack. The sense is very much that this is realistic. They will retain some presence at Bagram Air Base and around the U.S. Embassy, but certainly there's a feeling that they won't really have any trouble meeting this deadline. The question, of course, arises, well, what happens between now and then if the Taliban do step up their attacks and there are attacks against U.S. troops or against Afghan forces? Would that cause Joe Biden to change his calculation? Certainly seems unlikely at this point, but it's a big X factor in the next few months.
Nick Wadhams, thank you for the perspective that you bring us, of course, on some of that news, Romaine. And always tough to pivot heading back into the markets, but it's something that we're going to try to do here. There were some other big stories, of course, that we continue to follow today. Some of those, of course, being those bank earnings. We want to get to those with Cheryl Pate, a portfolio manager with Angel Oak Capital Advisors. Cheryl, we appreciate your patience. It was interesting. There's banking stocks indeed much higher today, seeming to gravitate really to that optimistic tone. Are you too optimistic in the financials?
I think what we were really looking for was a positive start to earnings season, and that's really predicated on economies reopening, vaccine deployment, and the economic recovery gaining strength, with the expectations that we could see some large reserve releases this quarter. And I think that's really what we got. We got good news on the credit front, and also starting to see positive green shoots in areas like consumer spending, which JP Morgan mentioned is now 14% above where we were in 1Q19, so pre-pandemic levels. So I thought there was a lot of good news to digest this morning.
Yeah, definitely some good news out of JP Morgan, out of Goldman Sachs, even out of Wells Fargo. I am curious, once we start going down a couple of tiers here in the banking sector, sort of away from the sort of gigantic money center banks and to some of the more regional banks, are we going to still have that same sense of optimism, or is the rate environment going to pose a bit of a problem?
I actually think we're actually more positively biased towards the regional banks than the large money center banks. And I think for a couple of reasons. We certainly got blowout earnings this morning from the big banks. I would argue what we're going to see out of the regional banks is going to be more sustainable. We are seeing stronger deposit growth out of the regional banks, as well as stronger loan growth. And PPP forgiveness should be additive to the net interest income, where we did see disproportionate participation from regional and community banks.
Cheryl, there seemed to be some miscommunication, perhaps, by maybe JP Morgan on the comments about loan demand and maybe being a headwind and some weakness. We heard similar comments, of course, from Wells Fargo. What is going on within loans? Is that as pessimistic as maybe some of the banks are telling us, or can that be a bright spot?
I think we still are going to see loan growth on the softer side for the next quarter or two.
Smash that
But
like
we are
button.
looking for strength as we move into the back half of
you
the
like,
year.
hopefully you
And I
did,
think
and
the
subscribe.
consumer spending numbers this morning
Don't
were
forget to hit the
particularly
bell.
indicative of where the trends may go.
Share.
As spending
It's a
will be a
historic
leading
day.
indicator for consumer releveraging.
by sharing this
certainly,
video
and also starting to see some green shoots
on all your
the commercial
social media
lending
platforms,
side.
and
So I think in the near term,
leave a
we get reserve
cool
releases
commenter,
that are driving
constructive.
some near-term earnings growth.
As
but
always,
the loan growth
thanks for
should
watching.
follow,
20-minute
in the back
video.
half of the year.